Welcome to HFY Narration, where humanity shines brightest even in the darkest corners of the universe. Today, we bring you alien mutant slave woman, abandoned and left for dead until saved by a human medic. A gripping tale of survival and redemption that will leave you questioning the limits of compassion and the power of hope. If this story draws you in, don't forget to hit that like button to show your support. Got thoughts on the story or your own HFY favourites? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And for more thrilling, human-centered sci-fi narratives, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Together, let's celebrate what it means to be human, clever, brave, and unstoppable. Now let's dive into the story. The planet Xantus was a desolate wasteland, its surface scarred by violent storms and jagged cliffs. It was a place where outcasts and the forgotten were sent to vanish, a graveyard for those deemed unworthy by the galaxy's elite. For Dr. Lyndon Reyes, it was just another day, his hovercraft cutting through the biting winds as he followed the faint signal of a distress beacon. The source of the signal was a wrecked escape pod, half buried in the sand. Inside, Lyndon found a figure slumped against the shattered controls, a woman. Her body was a strange blend of human and alien traits, her skin shimmering faintly with an iridescent hue, and her sharp features marred by blood and dirt. She was barely breathing. "Hold on," Lyndon murmured, his medical instincts kicking in. He checked her vitals, noting the erratic pulse and shallow breaths. Her hybrid physiology posed a challenge, but he wasn't one to back down. Her eyes fluttered open, violet irises locking onto his. "Why are you here?" she rasped, her voice weak but laced with suspicion. "To help," Lyndon replied, already stabilizing her with his portable medkit. "You don't look like you can say no right now." Lyndon's clinic was a repurposed mining facility on the edge of Xant's Ravine, a safe haven for the abandoned and injured. He carried the unconscious woman into his infirmary, setting her down on the only intact examination table. As he worked, her unique physiology revealed itself. Her blood shimmered, her bone structure a mix of human density and alien flexibility. Hours later, she stirred, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse but stronger. "My clinic," Lyndon replied, adjusting the bioscanner monitoring her vitals. "You're safe." She eyed him warily. "Why would you help someone like me?" "Because someone has to," Lyndon said simply, his tone firm. "And because no one deserves to die alone." She hesitated, then whispered, "My name is Mira." Lyndon smiled faintly. "Nice to meet you, Mira. Now let's make sure you stay alive." Over the next few days, as Mira recovered, fragments of her story emerged. She was a hybrid, half human, half Alth, the product of an experiment the Galactic Council had long since deemed a failure. When her escape pod malfunctioned, those who could have saved her turned a blind eye. "They called me a mistake," Mira said one evening, her tone bitter. "Even my survival wasn't worth their resources." Lyndon listened in silence, his jaw tightening. "They were wrong," he said after a moment. "You're not a mistake, Mira, not to me." Her violet eyes softened, though skepticism lingered. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not yet," Lyndon admitted, "but I've learned enough to know you're worth saving." For the first time in a long while, Mira allowed herself to hope, though she couldn't shake the fear that her past would catch up to her. Lyndon, however, seemed unshaken, his determination to protect her shining through the bleakness of Xantus. As Mira continued to recover under Dr. Lyndon's care, the small community around his clinic began to stir with curiosity and suspicion. Word spread quickly in Xantus, where secrets were as fleeting as the harsh winds. A half-human, half-Alth hybrid in their midst was a rarity, and one with a history tied to the Galactic Council even more so. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged cliffs, a group of miners gathered near Lyndon's clinic. Their leader, a burly man named Carrick, approached Lyndon with a grim expression. "Doc, you've been good to us," Carrick began, crossing his arms. "But bringing her here, that's trouble we can't afford." Lyndon leaned against the doorframe, his demeanour calm, but firm. "Mira's no threat. She's just trying to survive, like the rest of us." "Survive?" Carrick scoffed. "Do you know what happens if word gets out? The syndicate, bounty hunters, even the council, they won't care about your good intentions." "Let them come," Lyndon replied, his voice low and steady. "I won't abandon her. Not now, not ever." Inside the clinic, Mira overheard the conversation. Her hybrid senses were keen, picking up every word. The guilt weighed heavily on her as she sat by the window, watching the barren landscape stretch endlessly into the horizon. When Lyndon returned, Myra turned to him, her expression sombre. "You're risking everything for me," she said. "Maybe I should leave, find somewhere else to disappear." Lyndon pulled up a chair beside her, his gaze steady. "And go where, Mira? The galaxy has already tried to erase you. Here, you're not just surviving, you're living. That's worth fighting for." Mira hesitated, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're a fool, Lyndon." "Maybe," he said with a faint smile. "But I'm a fool with a purpose." The uneasy peace didn't last. Late one night, the clinic's perimeter sensors blared an alarm, jolting Lyndon awake. Mira was already at the window, her posture tense. "Someone's here," she whispered. Lyndon grabbed his sidearm and headed for the door. Outside, a sleek black hovercraft idled near the edge of the outpost. 3 figures stepped out, their movements deliberate and menacing. Their leader, a thin man with sharp features and a predatory air, addressed Lyndon. "Dr. Reyes," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "We have heard rumours you're harbouring someone special." "Rumours are just that," Lyndon replied, his grip on his weapon tightening. "I help anyone who needs it, no questions asked." "How noble," the man sneered. "But nobility doesn't pay well. Hand her over and we'll be on our way." Before Lyndon could respond, Mira stepped out of the clinic, her chin held high despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "You're here for me," she said, her voice steady. "Mira, don't," Lyndon started, but she cut him off. "I won't let them hurt you," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "You've done enough." The leader chuckled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Touching, but it's not your decision." As the mercenaries moved closer, Lyndon stepped in front of Mira, his weapon raised. "You'll have to go through me first." "That can be arranged," the leader snarled, signalling his men. The confrontation escalated quickly, with the mercenaries advancing on the clinic. But as the first shots were fired, a sudden explosion rocked the area, sending the attackers scrambling. From the shadows emerged Taran, a grizzled ex-soldier who had been quietly watching the situation unfold. "Thought you could use a hand," he said, tossing a thermal grenade launcher over his shoulder. Together, Lyndon, Mira and Terran fought off the mercenaries, using the clinic's fortified walls and improvised traps to their advantage. Mira, though still recovering, proved invaluable with her hybrid agility and sharp instincts. As the last mercenary fled, Mira turned to Lyndon, her breathing heavy. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Lyndon replied, his voice unwavering. "Because you matter." For the first time in her life, Mira felt not just protected, but valued. And as they stood amidst the wreckage of the night's battle, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever shadows came their way. The attack on the clinic marked a turning point. Dr. Lyndon Reyes and Mira knew the mercenaries' retreat was temporary. Word of her survival would spread, and more would come, better armed and more determined. The clinic, once a sanctuary for the forgotten, became a fortress in the making. Lyndon, Mira, and Terran, the ex-soldier who had aided in their defense, worked tirelessly to strengthen their position. Terran's military experience proved invaluable as he directed efforts to fortify the clinic's perimeter with makeshift barricades and traps crafted from salvage mining equipment. "You've got good instincts, Doc," Terran said, watching Lyndon repurpose medical supplies into defensive tools. "But this is war." Lyndon adjusted a makeshift smoke bomb, his hand steady despite the gravity of their situation. "If that's what it takes to keep Mira safe, then so be it." Mira refused to sit idle. Though her body still bore the scars of her crash, her hybrid physiology gave her an edge, and she insisted on training with Terran. Together, they honed her natural agility and strength into effective combat skills. "Your reflexes are faster than mine ever were," Terran remarked after she disarmed him for the first time. Mira smirked, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "Guess there's some advantage to being a mistake after all." Despite her bravado, Mira confided in Lyndon one quiet evening. "I'm afraid of what's coming," she admitted, sitting beside him as they reviewed their defenses. "Not just for me, but for you, for everyone here." Lyndon met her gaze, his voice steady. "Fear's natural, Mira, but it doesn't define you. You've already faced worse and come out stronger. We'll do it again, together." The Syndicate's retaliation arrived with a thunderous roar at dawn. A convoy of armoured hovercrafts descended on Xant's ravine, their engines echoing across the barren landscape. The leader of the force was Kyle Darroch, a seasoned enforcer with a reputation for ruthlessness. His scarred face was cold as he addressed the clinic through a booming loudspeaker. "Hand over the hybrid and no one else needs to get hurt," Kyle declared, his voice dripping with menace. "Defy us, and this place burns." From their vantage point, Lyndon, Mira, and Terran surveyed the approaching forces. "They've got heavy artillery," Terran noted grimly. "We're outgunned, but not outmatched," Mira said, her voice steady. She turned to Lyndon. "We fight." The Syndicate troops advanced, their precision terrifying, but the clinic's defences held. Traps sprung in the narrow ravine, turning the terrain against the attackers. Smoke bombs blinded their sensors, and crude mines disrupted their formations. Mira moved like a shadow among them, her hybrid agility allowing her to dart between cover and disable Syndicate soldiers with startling efficiency. Lyndon, stationed at the clinic, worked tirelessly to treat the wounded defenders while coordinating their efforts. "You're holding up better than most soldiers I've seen," Terran said to Mira during a brief lull. "I've had a lifetime of running and hiding," she replied, her gaze fierce. "Now I'm done running." Realizing brute force wouldn't break the defenders, Kale deployed a plasma cannon mounted on a hover tank. The weapon tore through their outer barricades, forcing the defenders to retreat closer to the clinic. "We can't let that cannon get closer," Lyndon said, his tone urgent. "I'll handle it," Mira volunteered, determination flashing in her violet eyes. "No," Lyndon interjected, "not alone. We go together." Using the chaos as cover, Lyndon, Mira, and Terran flanked the tank. While Terran distracted the gunners, Mira climbed onto the vehicle with astounding agility, disabling its targeting systems. Lyndon planted an explosive charge near the plasma core, and they retreated as the tank erupted in a fiery explosion. As the dust settled, the Syndicate forces faltered, their leader's weapon destroyed. Kale, however, remained resolute, his gaze locked on Mira as he regrouped his troops. "This isn't over," Kale snarled, retreating into the shadows with his remaining forces. Back at the clinic, the defenders regrouped, their exhaustion palpable, but their spirits unbroken. Lyndon found Mira sitting on the roof, her expression distant as she stared at the horizon. "You saved us," he said, sitting beside her. "We saved each other," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "But they'll come back stronger." "Then we'll be ready," Lyndon said, his confidence unshaken. "We've come too far to give up now." In that moment, the bond between them solidified, a partnership forged in the crucible of conflict. With a shared determination to protect what they had built, together they prepared for the battles yet to come, knowing that their strength lay in their unity. The days following the Syndicate's retreat were a blur of preparation. Dr. Lyndon Reyes, Mira and Taryn worked tirelessly to repair the clinic's defences and plan for the inevitable return of Cale Duroc. The air around the clinic was tense, but it buzzed with an undercurrent of hope. The small community around the clinic began to rally, bringing whatever resources they could spare. Old mining equipment was repurposed into barricades, and hidden caches of weapons were unearthed by sympathetic locals who had grown tired of the Syndicate's tyranny. "These people believe in us now," Mira said as she watched the ragtag group of volunteers fortifying the perimeter. "But what if it's not enough?" Lyndon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Belief is a powerful weapon, and so are you." One night, as the defenders rested, a lone figure approached the clinic's edge. It was Carrick, the miner who had once questioned Mira's presence. His face was pale, his movements jittery. "They're coming," he gasped, collapsing into Taryn's arms. "Cale has reinforcements, armoured division, aerial drones. He's bringing everything to wipe you out." Mira clenched her fists, her glowing violet eyes narrowing. "Then we'll show him he underestimated us." Lyndon nodded. "We've faced worse odds. Together, we'll make sure this is the last time they threaten anyone here." The Syndicate's forces arrived at dawn, their numbers doubling the previous assault. Armoured vehicles rolled across the barren expanse, flanked by sleek drones buzzing menacingly in the sky. At the forefront was Cale, his scarred face set in a determined sneer. "Eliminate them all," Cale commanded, his voice amplified through a booming loudspeaker. "Leave no survivors." The attack began with a barrage of plasma fire. The clinic's defences, though makeshift, held strong under the pressure. Coordinated efforts of the defenders, traps detonated, disabling vehicles and scattering enemy troops. The narrow terrain of the ravine forced the Syndicate into bottlenecks where Mira and Taryn struck with precision. Mira's hybrid abilities shone in the chaos. Her agility and strength allowed her to outmaneuver drones and overpower soldiers. She moved like a blur, her glowing hands disarming attackers and shielding allies. "You're a force of nature," Taryn said, covering her as she took down a heavily armed Syndicate soldier. "And you're not so bad yourself," Mira replied with a faint smirk, her confidence growing with each victory. As the battle raged on, Cale deployed his trump card, a massive mech outfitted with advanced weaponry. Its plasma cannons tore through barricades, forcing the defenders to retreat closer to the clinic. From the cockpit, Cale sneered, "You can't win this hybrid. Surrender and I might let your human friends live." Mira stepped forward, her voice ringing out above the chaos. "You think you can scare us, Cale? We've already beaten you once. We'll do it again." Her defiance ignited a rallying cry among the defenders, their resolve hardening as they prepared to face the seemingly insurmountable threat. Realizing the mech could destroy them all, Lyndon devised a bold plan. "We have to disable its power core," he explained, sketching out the mech's weak points based on its design. "It's dangerous, but it's our only shot." "I'll go," Mira volunteered without hesitation. "No," Lyndon said firmly, "we go together." Using the chaos as cover, Mira and Lyndon worked their way toward the mech. Taryn provided covering fire, drawing the Syndicate's attention. Mira scaled the machine's massive frame, her hybrid strength allowing her to pry open a panel near its core. Inside the mech, Mira planted an explosive charge on the power core, her movements swift and precise. "Now, Lyndon," she shouted as she leaped clear. Lyndon detonated the charge, and the mech shuddered violently before collapsing in a spectacular explosion. The blast disoriented the Syndicate forces, sending them into disarray. "Push forward," Taran yelled, leading the defenders in a counterattack. The Syndicate, demoralized and leaderless, began to retreat. As the last of the Syndicate forces fled, cheers erupted among the defenders. Mira and Lyndon stood together amidst the wreckage, their breaths heavy, but their determination unbroken. "You did it," Lyndon said, his voice filled with pride. "We did it," Mira corrected, her gaze softening. "Together." The clinic, though battered, stood as a beacon of hope. The community that had once been fractured was now united, inspired by the resilience and courage of two unlikely heroes. And as the sun set over the ravine, Mira and Lyndon prepared for whatever came next, their bond stronger than ever. The Syndicate's retreat left the defenders of the clinic in a state of cautious relief. But as the dust settled, Dr. Lyndon Reyes and Mira knew that Kyle Duroc, the Syndicate enforcer, would not accept defeat so easily. Reports from scouts indicated that Kyle was rallying his forces for one final assault, determined to end what he had started. "This isn't about capturing you anymore," Lyndon said to Mira as they stood on the clinic's roof, surveying the aftermath of the battle. "It's about vengeance." Mira nodded, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "Then we need to be ready. This time, we make sure he doesn't come back." The defenders, though weary, prepared for the next wave with renewed determination. Supplies were gathered, fortifications reinforced, and strategies devised. The locals who had once doubted Mira now rallied around her, inspired by her courage. Taran took charge of training the volunteers, turning miners and scavengers into a formidable fighting force. Meanwhile, Mira worked alongside Lyndon, her hybrid strength allowing her to assist in setting traps and fortifying the clinic's interior. "You're not just fighting for survival anymore," Taran told Mira during a break. "You're leading them." Mira glanced at the defenders, her expression a mix of pride and responsibility. "I never thought I'd be anything more than a mistake," she said quietly. "But now I feel like I have a purpose." The Syndicate forces arrived under the cover of night, their approach marked by the low hum of hovercrafts and the glow of their engines. Cale himself led the charge, his presence commanding as he addressed the defenders through a booming loudspeaker. "Mira," Cale called, his voice dripping with malice. "You've caused enough trouble. Surrender now, and I might spare these people. Defy me, and I'll reduce this place to ashes." Mira stepped forward, standing atop the clinic's barricades. "We've already beaten you, Cale," she shouted back, "and we'll do it again." Cale laughed coldly. "You've made your choice. Prepare to suffer for it." The assault began with a coordinated barrage of plasma fire, testing the clinic's defences. The defenders held their ground, using the traps and bottlenecks to their advantage. The narrow ravine forced the Syndicate into close-quarters combat, where Mira's agility and strength shone. As the battle raged, Cale unleashed his trump card, a massive siege crawler outfitted with heavy artillery and shields. The machine advanced relentlessly, its weapons tearing through the clinic's outer barricades. Realizing the siege crawler would destroy everything, Lyndon devised a daring plan. "We need to disable its shield generator," he explained, pointing to a schematic projected on his data pad. "It's located on the crawler's underside. If we can get close enough, we can plant an explosive charge." "I'll do it," Mira volunteered immediately. "No," Lyndon said, his voice firm. "Not alone. We do this together." Under cover of smoke bombs, Mira and Lyndon made their way toward the crawler. Taran provided covering fire, drawing the Syndicate's attention. Mira used her hybrid agility to climb onto the massive machine, locating the shield generator and planting the explosive charge. "Lyndon, it's set!" she shouted, leaping clear as the countdown began. The explosion rocked the crawler, its shields failing in a spectacular burst of energy. The defenders seized the moment, launching a counterattack that overwhelmed the Syndicate forces. Cale, disoriented and enraged, attempted to rally his troops, but it was too late. The defenders advanced with a ferocity born of desperation and hope, forcing the Syndicate into a full retreat. As the Syndicate fled, Cale found himself cornered by Mira and Lyndon. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered, his plasma blade raised. "It changes everything," Mira said, her voice steady. With a swift, precise strike, she disarmed him, her glowing hands neutralizing his weapon. Cale fell to his knees, his defiance giving way to fear. "Do it," he spat. "End it." Mira hesitated, then lowered her hand. "You're not worth it," she said, turning away. With Cale defeated and the Syndicate routed, the clinic became a symbol of resilience and unity. The defenders celebrated their hard-won victory, but for Mira and Lyndon, the moment was bittersweet. Standing together on the clinic's roof, they watched the sunrise over the ravine. "We've built something incredible here," Lyndon said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And it's just the beginning," Mira replied, her violet eyes soft with gratitude. "Because of you, I found more than just survival. I found a reason to fight." Lyndon smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And because of you, I remembered why I chose this path." As the light of a new day bathed the ravine, Mira and Lyndon stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy might throw their way. Together, they had proven that even in the darkest corners, hope could thrive, and love could transform the impossible into the extraordinary.